A woman defeated by life returned home carrying invisible scars. But when she decided to start over through cooking, something magical happened. Secrets from the past came to light, an unexpected love blossomed, and her life was transformed in ways no one could have imagined. A story of overcoming adversity, new beginnings, and second chances that shows how sometimes we need to return home to discover who we really are. Get ready because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment on where you are watching from. The train slowed with a metallic sigh that echoed across the wet Oxford platform. Clara Evans tightened her fingers around the handle of her suitcase, feeling the worn leather that had witnessed so many departures and arrivals. 5 years. 5 long years since she had left that city behind, carrying shattered dreams and a broken heart that still ached at the thought of what she had lost. The gray October sky weighed down the familiar rooftops like a damp blanket, and Clara pulled her coat tighter around her. At 32, she was no longer the idealistic young woman who had set out in search of a better life abroad. The fine lines around her eyes told stories of sleepless nights, silent struggles, and an inner strength tested beyond its limits. As she walked the cobblestone streets she knew by heart, every corner stirred memories she'd tried to bury. The bakery where she used to buy fresh bread in the morning, the square where she'd had her first kiss at 16, the bookstore where she'd spent entire afternoons lost in imaginary worlds. Everything remained surprisingly unchanged, as if time had frozen at the moment of her departure. It was as she turned the corner onto Regent Street that she saw him. Julian Hayes was standing in front of the small cafe The Owl's Nest, exactly where they used to meet during school holidays. He had grown, his shoulders broader, the confident posture of someone who had found his place in the world. But he still maintained that intense focus she remembered from childhood. His brown hair now had silver streaks at the temples, and he wore a woolen coat that screamed professional success. Their eyes met across the narrow street, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. Clara felt her heart race, not with joy but with a complex mix of anxiety and something she couldn't quite name. Julian frowned slightly, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the girl from his memories. "Clara?" His voice cut across the space between them, filled with surprise and a caution she hadn't expected. She forced a smile, the polite kind she'd perfected over years of corporate meetings and diplomatic dinners abroad. "Hello, Julian. You haven't changed much." It was a gentle lie. He had changed completely. There was a gravity in his presence that hadn't been there before, an intensity in his dark eyes that hinted at experiences that had shaped him in fundamental ways. "Neither do you," he lied back, but his eyes said otherwise. They saw the changes, the way her shoulders held a little stiffer, as if she were constantly bracing for a blow, the cautious way she chose her words. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and unprovided explanations. Clara adjusted the strap of her bag, a nervous gesture Julian remembered from his teenage years. "Are you back to stay?" The question came out more abruptly than he'd intended, and Clara heard a note of something, irritation, worry, in his voice. "For a while," she replied vaguely, avoiding his eyes. The truth was more complicated. She had returned because she had nowhere else to go, because the life she had carefully built abroad had collapsed so spectacularly that Oxford, with all its ghosts, seemed the only remaining refuge. Julian nodded, but she could tell he was processing information, trying to read between the lines. He'd always been that way, too observant, too intuitive. It was one of the things that had both irritated and fascinated her when they were young. "Well," he said finally, "welcome back." There was something in the way he said it, formal, distant, that made Clara realize her presence wasn't exactly a joy to him. Maybe it was for the best. She'd come back to rebuild her life, not relive the past. "Thank you," she murmured, already taking a step away. "It was good to see you, Julian." But as she walked away, Clara could feel his eyes on her back, and a strange feeling settled in her stomach. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something more unsettling, as if her arrival had upset a delicate balance that had been carefully maintained in her absence. Her Aunt Margaret's house on Beaumont Street was exactly as Clara remembered it. Faded floral wallpaper, antique furniture that told stories of generations past, and the comforting scent of lavender and gingerbread cookies that seemed to permeate the very walls. "My dear girl." Margaret hugged her tightly, and Clara allowed herself to sink into that embrace that smelled of home and security. At 70, Margaret Evans still retained the vibrant energy Clara remembered from childhood, but there was a new fragility in her movements that made Clara realize how much time had truly passed. "Aunt Maggie," Clara murmured against her aunt's gray hair. "Thank you for letting me stay here." "Nonsense." Margaret pulled her away to examine her with sharp eyes that missed little. "This has always been your home as much as mine. But you're very thin, dear, and there's something in your eyes. Something that worries me." Clara looked away. Margaret had always been able to see through her most carefully constructed defenses. "I just need some time to compose myself. Things in London have gotten complicated." "Man?" Margaret asked directly, as she always did. "Among other things." Clara wasn't ready to talk about David, about how he had disappeared from her life at the moment she needed support most, about how his illness had revealed how fragile her carefully constructed life was. Margaret nodded in understanding. "Well, you're home now, and London isn't that far, just a train ride away. You can come and go as you please." But Clara knew she wouldn't be returning to London anytime soon. Her international consulting career had ended humiliatingly, with colleagues subtly questioning her competence after her sick days, projects being reassigned without explanation, and an environment that gradually became too hostile to bear. Over the next few days, Clara tried to establish a routine. Morning walks through the city center, afternoons helping Margaret with small household chores, evenings reading in the room that had been hers during school holidays. It was peaceful, almost meditative, but also unsettlingly empty. It was during one of these walks that she ran into Julian again. He was leaving a sleek office on High Street, a leather briefcase under his arm, and the phone pressed to his ear. Clara tried to remain inconspicuous, but he spotted her and, after quickly ending the call, caught up with her. "Clara, wait." She turned reluctantly. "Julian, how are you?" "Well, listen, about the other day, I was kind of abrupt. Sorry." Clara shook her head. "No need to apologize. I understand that my return might be unexpected for some people. It's not that." Julian seemed to choose his words carefully. "It's just, well, you know how it is here. People talk. And when you left, do people still talk about this?" Clara felt a wave of embarrassment. She had hoped that 5 years would be enough time for her departure to become ancient history. Julian hesitated. "Not exactly. But your family, your mother talked about you often, about your success in London, about your international work. People were impressed." Clara felt a knot in her stomach. Her mother had always been prone to exaggeration, especially when it came to impressing the neighbors. The reality of her life in London had been far more modest, and ultimately far more traumatic, than her mother had ever known. "What now?" she asked. "What are people saying now? That you came back to take care of Margaret? That you're a good niece who left her career to take care of her family?" Clara almost laughed at the irony. "And what do you think?" Julian studied her for a moment. "I think there's more to the story than that." It was a statement, not a question, and Clara felt her defenses bristle. "Everyone has a right to some privacy, Julian." "Sure," he agreed quickly. "I wasn't trying to be nosy, it's just, well, if you need anything or if you want to talk to someone who understands what it's like to come home after a long time away." "You came back too?" 2 years ago. I was working in Manchester, but my father became ill and I had to take over the family architectural practice." There was a subtle bitterness in his voice that Clara caught immediately. "You didn't want to come back." "It wasn't exactly the plan," Julian admitted. "But sometimes life forces us to take directions we wouldn't have chosen on our own." Clara felt an unexpected connection with him. "Sometimes." They walked in silence for a few minutes, and Clara was surprised to find that his presence wasn't uncomfortable. There was something reassuring about being with someone who understood, at least in part, what it meant to have one's plans defeated by circumstance. "Have you ever thought about opening your own restaurant?" Julian asked suddenly. Clara looked at him in surprise. "How did you know I cook?" "Your aunt mentioned it. And I remember you always talking about cooking when we were younger. You used to bring amazing snacks to school picnics." Clara smiled despite herself. "I had forgotten about that." "It was one of the things I liked most about you," Julian said simply, and then seemed to regret the admission. "I mean, you've always been creative with food." Clara felt a strange warmth in her chest. "I thought about it, actually, about the restaurant, but it would be a big risk. The best dreams usually are." The following weeks brought a comforting routine. Clara began cooking for Margaret, experimenting with recipes she had learned during her travels, and rediscovering the joy she felt in creating something beautiful and nutritious. Margaret became an enthusiastic taster, always offering suggestions and compliments that made Clara feel valued in a way she hadn't experienced in years. It was Margaret who suggested that Clara take some of her dishes to the local market on Saturdays. "Just a few samples," she said casually as she savored a mushroom risotto Clara had prepared. "To see people's reactions, I bet Sarah Mitchell would be interested. She always has trouble finding suppliers for her cafe." Clara considered the idea. The Oxford Saturday Market had always been a social event as much as a commercial one, a place where the community gathered for more than just shopping. It would be a way to test their skills in a low-pressure environment. "Maybe," she said cautiously. "It could be interesting." In truth, the idea terrified her. It meant exposing herself to the judgment of the community, subjecting her passion to public scrutiny. But it also meant taking the first step towards something that could be her own. She spent the week planning carefully. She settled on a selection of small plates that showcased her versatility. Tartines with unusual combinations of ingredients, small desserts that played with unexpected textures and flavors, and her pride and joy. Small individual pies that combined French techniques she had learned with the comforting flavors of English cuisine. On Friday night, while preparing everything for the next day, Clara heard a knock on the door. Margaret went to answer it and returned with Julian, who looked slightly uncomfortable. "Sorry to bother you," he said, addressing Clara. "Margaret mentioned you're attending the market tomorrow. I thought you might want an extra hand to carry things." Clara looked at him in surprise. "That's very kind of you. But why would you do that?" Julian hesitated, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Honestly, because I know what it's like to try something new in a town where everyone's known you since you were a kid. And because—" He paused, as if debating whether to continue. "Why?" "Because I've always admired your courage. Even when we were kids, you were always willing to try new things, even when everyone else was judging you." Clara felt an unexpected surge of emotion. "I don't feel very brave lately." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Julian said softly. "It's doing the right thing, despite the fear." On Saturday morning, Julian showed up promptly at 7, helping Clara carry her coolers and supplies to the market. The air was crisp and fresh, with that golden quality of an English autumn that made everything seem hand-painted. The market was already bustling when they arrived, with vendors setting up their stalls and the first morning customers wandering among the stalls. Clara felt a knot in her stomach when she saw some familiar faces, people who had known her since childhood, who remembered her grand ambitions and her dramatic departure. "You'll be fine," Julian murmured, as he helped her arrange the dishes on her table. "Just be yourself. What if nobody likes it? What if everyone loves?" Clara looked at him and saw something in his eyes that reassured her. It wasn't pity or forced sympathy, but genuine confidence in her abilities. The first few hours were slow. A few people stopped to look. Many recognized Clara and asked politely about her return, but few actually tried the food. Clara began to feel exposed and foolish, as if she had grossly overestimated her abilities. Then Sarah Mitchell showed up. The owner of the Owl's Nest was a woman in her 50s, known for her discerning palate and support of local businesses. She stopped by Clara's stall, examined the dishes with professional interest, and without saying a word, tried one of the tartines. Clara held her breath as Sarah chewed thoughtfully. "Interesting," Sarah finally said. "The combination of pear, blue cheese, and walnuts is classic, but there's something more here." "Local clover, honey." "With a touch of fresh thyme," Clara confirmed, her heart pounding. Sarah nodded. "And those pies. Can I try one?" Clara watched as Sarah carefully savored the lamb and rosemary pie that had been her riskiest bet. "Exceptional," Sarah said finally, and Clara felt a wave of relief and pride. "Have you ever considered supplying local restaurants?" It was exactly the question Clara had expected, but hadn't dared to expect so soon. Yes, actually, I was considering that. Come see me next week, Sarah said, pulling a business card from her purse. We can talk about a partnership. After Sarah walked away, Clara turned to Julian, who had witnessed the entire exchange with a growing smile on his face. See, he said, I told you you'd rock. For the rest of the morning, more people stopped by Clara's stall. Some recognized her talent immediately. Others needed convincing. But by the end of the day, she had sold almost everything and collected contact information for 3 local restaurants interested in sourcing. How are you feeling? Julian asked as he helped pack the few remaining items. Clara paused to consider the question. As if I've just taken the first step in a direction I can't yet fully see, but which feels right. Julian smiled. That's exactly how you should feel. The meeting with Sarah Mitchell the following week went better than Clara had dared hope. Sarah was interested in a regular partnership. Clara would provide artisanal desserts and some special dishes for the cafe's weekly menu in exchange for a space to display and sell her products on weekends. It's a win-win situation, Sarah explained as they signed a simple contract. You get exposure and a steady income stream, and I get unique products that will differentiate my cafe from the competition. Clara left the meeting feeling more optimistic than she had in months. For the first time since her return, she could envision a future that wasn't just about surviving but about building something of her own. That feeling of hope lasted until she bumped into Rebecca Thornton as she was leaving the bank. Rebecca had been his classmate in high school, one of the popular girls who always seemed to have everything under control. Now she was elegantly dressed in expensive clothes, talking on the phone about something involving the new marketing campaign and maximizing ROI. "Clara Evans," Rebecca exclaimed when she ended the call. "My God, you're really back." There was something about the way she said it that made Clara feel immediately defensive. "Hello, Rebecca. How are you?" "Fantastic. I just closed a huge contract for my advertising agency in London. What about you? I hear you're cooking right now." The way Rebecca said cooking made it sound like a lesser occupation, a regression. Clara forced a smile. "I'm exploring some culinary opportunities, yes." "That's interesting," Rebecca said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Quite a change after all that international consulting, isn't it? But I imagine after the health issues you've had, maybe something less stressful would be better." Clara felt her blood run cold. How had Rebecca known about her illness? She had been extremely careful to keep that information private, especially since cancer, even though fully treated and cured, still carried stigma in the corporate world. "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara said coldly. "Oh, honey, don't worry," Rebecca said with false compassion. "David mentioned it to some mutual friends when you broke up. He was very worried about you, of course, but he said you needed space to heal, both physically and emotionally. How romantic of him, really." Clara felt nauseous. David had spoken about her illness to people she barely knew, turning her private struggle into social gossip. Worse, he had distorted the narrative, making himself seem like the sympathetic martyr instead of the man who had rushed out when she needed him most. "Well," Rebecca continued, clearly pleased with the reaction she'd elicited, "it's great to see you're recovering. And who knows, maybe cooking is just what you need. Something more domestic, less pressure." After Rebecca walked away, Clara stood on the sidewalk, shaking with rage and humiliation. She could imagine the story spreading. Clara Evans, the ambitious woman who had left Oxford with big dreams, returning defeated, ill, abandoned by her husband, reduced to making muffins for local cafes. She walked aimlessly through the familiar streets, trying to process the conversation. In the city center, she found herself in front of Julian's office. Through the window, she could see him hunched over a clipboard, completely absorbed in his work. Without thinking completely, she pushed the door open and walked in. Julian looked up, surprised. "Clara, is everything okay? You look... Did you know?" she asked abruptly. "About my illness? About David?" Julian slowly put his pencil aside. "I knew you'd been through something difficult. Margaret mentioned you'd faced some health challenges, but she didn't elaborate. I didn't ask questions because I figured if you wanted to talk about it, you would." Clara felt a wave of relief. At least Julian hadn't been gossiping about her behind her back. "Rebecca Thornton just confronted me on the street," Apparently, David told half the world about my cancer diagnosis and our separation, painting himself as the sympathetic hero of the story. Julian stood, his expression hardening. What a son of a... Yes, Clara said bitterly. And now the whole town will know. Clara Evans, the broken woman who came home because she couldn't handle real life. That's complete bullshit, Julian said with a vehemence that surprised her. You survived cancer. You left a toxic relationship. You came home and in a matter of weeks you're already building a new business. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. Clara felt tears threaten her eyes. That's not how people will see it. Then these people are idiots, Julian said firmly. And who cares what they think anyway? I care, Clara admitted. I know I shouldn't, but I do. Julian studied her for a moment, then reached out and gently touched her arm. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice. I see someone who faced their worst fears and survived. Someone who had the courage to leave a life that wasn't working and start over. Someone who is chasing their dreams, even when it's easier to give up. And that person, they are incredible. Clara looked into his eyes and saw absolute sincerity. For a moment, she almost believed him. Thank you, she murmured. Don't thank me for telling the truth, Julian said. And Clara, if anyone else tries to make you feel small, you tell me. Oxford may be a small city, but that doesn't mean you have to tolerate small people. In the days following her unpleasant encounter with Rebecca, Clara forced herself to focus on work. She spent hours in Margaret's kitchen, perfecting recipes and experimenting with flavor combinations. The precision required for cooking, the careful measuring of ingredients, the precise timing, the attention to detail, was meditative in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Margaret proved to be not only an enthusiastic taster, but also an unexpected source of business advice. When your Uncle George and I opened the craft shop, she said one afternoon as Clara baked a new version of her famous scones, everyone said we were crazy. Who's going to buy expensive crafts when they can buy them at the mall? They'd ask. But we knew there were people who valued quality and originality. You just have to find your audience. How did you do that? One person at a time, Margaret smiled. Every satisfied customer was an advocate for our work. Word of mouth is still the best advertising, especially in a city like Oxford. Clara nodded, absorbing the advice. It was true. Sarah Mitchell had already mentioned that several of her clients had inquired about the desserts Clara was providing. Aunt Maggie, Clara said hesitantly, have you ever regretted any important decisions you've made? Margaret stopped stirring her tea and looked at Clara thoughtfully. Of course, many times. But you know what I've learned? Regret is only useful if it teaches you something. If you just dwell on what could have been different, you miss what's happening now. What if people judge your choices? Let them be the judge, Margaret said pragmatically. People will always have opinions. The question is, will you live your life based on what you want or what others expect of you? That night, Clara went into town to find some special ingredients she needed. She was leaving the deli when she saw Julian across the street, chatting animatedly with an elegant blonde woman. They were standing very close together, and when the woman laughed at something Julian said, she placed her hand on his arm in a manner that suggested intimacy. Clara felt a strange pang in her stomach. Jealousy? Why would she care if Julian was involved with someone? She shook her head, irritated with herself. She had more important matters to worry about than Julian Hayes' love life. But when she got home, she found she couldn't get the image out of her head. During dinner, she found herself distracted, answering Margaret's questions in monosyllabic fashion. Are you okay, dear? Margaret finally asked. You seem distant. Just thinking about work, Clara lied. In truth, she was thinking about how she had felt when Julian had stood up for her in the office, about the way he had looked at her as if she were capable of anything, about how his presence made her feel less alone in a city full of people who knew her only for who she had been in the past. It was dangerous, she reminded herself. She had returned to Oxford to heal and rebuild, not to get emotionally involved with anyone, especially someone with whom she had a complicated history. The following Saturday, Clara was setting up her stall at the market when Julian appeared again to help. You don't have to do this every week, she said, trying to keep her voice casual. I'm sure you have more important things to do on the weekends. Julian looked at her curiously. Like what? Clara hesitated. I don't know. Going out with friends or whoever. Whoever it is? Clara blushed, realizing she'd revealed herself. "I saw you last night, talking to that blonde woman. You seemed close." Julian smiled slowly. "That was Emma, my younger sister. She came to visit me from Cambridge to discuss plans for our parents' anniversary." "Oh." Clara felt stupid. "I didn't know you had a younger sister." "You never asked," Julian said gently. "But now that you mention it, were you jealous?" Clara concentrated intently on arranging her desserts, avoiding his gaze. "Of course not. I was just being polite." "Right," Julian said, but she could hear the smile in his voice. That day's market was the best yet. Clara sold almost everything and received orders from 3 clients for private events. One of the women who stopped by her stall was Helen Morrison, one of the region's most respected event planners. "I've heard about your work," Helen said after trying one of Clara's tartines. "Sarah Mitchell can't stop raving about your desserts. Have you ever considered catering for larger events?" "Honestly, I hadn't considered that yet," Clara admitted. "You should. I have a wedding in December that needs a unique catering service. The bride and groom want something unique, not the conventional dishes everyone else offers. Would you be interested?" Clara felt her heart race. A wedding would be a big step, much more ambitious than providing desserts for a cafe. But it would also be an incredible opportunity to showcase her skills on a larger scale. Yes, I would be very interested," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Great. Call me next week and we can talk about the details." After Helen walked away, Julian approached, clearly having heard the conversation. "A whole wedding?" he asked. "That's huge." "I know," Clara said, a mixture of excitement and panic in her voice. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big." "You are," Julian said with conviction. "And if you need help with anything, planning, logistics, loading equipment, you can count on me." Clara looked at him, touched by his offer. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me so much?" Julian hesitated, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Because I believe in you. And because I like being around you." The admission hung between them, fraught with possibilities and complications. Clara felt her pulse quicken, but she also felt the familiar urge to protect herself, to maintain emotional distance. "Julian," she began. "I know," he said quickly. "You're not looking for complications. I understand, but that doesn't mean we can't be friends, right? Friends who help each other out?" Clara nodded, grateful for the escape he'd offered. Friends. But even as she said it, she knew she was lying to herself. What she felt for Julian went far beyond friendship, and that terrified her more than any culinary challenge. Meeting Helen Morrison the following week was both inspiring and intimidating. The wedding was for 150 guests in a historic mansion on the outskirts of Oxford. Helen wanted a menu that reflected both elegance and originality, exactly the kind of challenge Clara relished, but also the kind that could ruin her burgeoning reputation if not executed perfectly. "The bride and groom are both academics," Helen explained as they reviewed the details. "He's a professor of medieval literature, she's an art historian. They want something that honors historical culinary traditions but with a contemporary twist." Clara left the meeting with pages of notes and a mind buzzing with ideas. It was an ambitious project, perhaps too ambitious for someone who had only recently started selling in the local market. But it was also exactly the kind of opportunity that could establish her reputation for good. She spent the next few days immersed in research, studying medieval and Renaissance recipes, experimenting with modern techniques applied to historical ingredients. Margaret became a valuable advisor, recalling stories she'd heard from her own grandmother about traditional cooking methods. It was during one of these brainstorming sessions that the doorbell rang. Margaret went to answer it and returned with a worried expression. "Clara, dear, there's a man at the door asking for you. He says his name is David." Clara felt her blood run cold. David. Here, in Oxford. She forced herself to stand, smoothed her apron, and went to the door. David stood in the front yard, looking uncomfortable but determined. He was still handsome, perfectly combed blonde hair, expensive suit, practiced smile. But now Clara could see things she'd missed before. The way his eyes constantly assessed his surroundings. The way his posture suggested he was always playing a role. "Clara," he said, smiling that smile that had once made her heart race. You look beautiful. What are you doing here, David? Her voice came out colder than she'd planned, but she didn't try to soften it. I came to see you, of course. I heard you'd gone back to Oxford and I thought maybe it was time we had a proper chat. There's nothing to talk about. David took a step closer, and Clara instinctively backed away. Clara, please. I know things ended badly between us, but that was a long time ago. We've both changed, we've grown. You're right, Clara said. I've changed. I've grown up. That's why I have no interest in reliving the past. It's not about reliving the past, David said, his voice taking on that persuasive tone she remembered well. It's about acknowledging that maybe we were hasty, that maybe I was hasty. Clara studied him. What do you really want, David? He hesitated, and she saw the moment he decided to change tack. Okay, I'll be blunt. I made mistakes. Lots of mistakes. When you got sick, I panicked. I didn't know how to handle it, so I ran away. It was cowardly, and I know that now. You didn't just run away, Clara said coldly. You told people about my diagnosis. You turned my private struggle into social gossip. David blushed slightly. I was processing my own feelings. Maybe I talked to some people I shouldn't have, but it was because I was confused and scared. And now I know I made the biggest mistake of my life. Clara, you are the strongest woman I know. You survived something that would destroy most people, and here you are, rebuilding, creating something beautiful. He gestured vaguely toward the house. I heard about your culinary work. It's incredible. Clara felt a surge of anger. You know nothing about my work. I know you've always had a talent for this, and I know you could be even more successful with the right support, with the right partner. You mean with you? I have connections, Clara, in London, all over the country. I could help you expand, turn this into something really big. Clara looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and pity. Do you really believe I would come back to you after everything that happened? I believe we are intelligent people who can learn from our mistakes, David said. I believe what we had was real and worth fighting for. What we had, Clara said slowly, was me trying to be who you wanted me to be, and you liking me only when it was convenient for you. That's not fair, isn't it? Clara interrupted. You left me when I needed you most. You violated my privacy. You made me feel like my illness was a personal failure, like I was a burden. And now you show up here after I've rebuilt my life without you, and expect me to forget all of this because you've decided you want me back? David opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of Julian, who appeared around the corner carrying 2 cups of coffee and stopped abruptly when he saw the scene. Sorry, Julian said, clearly realizing he'd interrupted something. I brought coffee, but I can come back later. No, Clara said quickly. You don't have to go. David was just leaving. David looked between Clara and Julian, and she saw the moment he made his own conclusions about the nature of their relationship. I see, he said, his tone turning cold. You replaced it quickly. I didn't replace anyone, Clara said angrily. I moved on. You should do the same. David studied her for a moment, then nodded curtly. Very well. But Clara, if you change your mind, when you realize you're limiting yourself here in this small town, with small people and small dreams, you know how to find me. He walked away without looking back, leaving Clara shaking with rage and adrenaline. Julian approached cautiously. Are you okay? Clara nodded, gratefully accepting one of the cups of coffee he offered. My ex-husband. Apparently he's decided he wants me back. And you? Clara looked at Julian, seeing genuine concern in his eyes. I want him gone from my life permanently. Julian visibly relaxed. Good, because to be honest, I didn't like him at all. Despite herself, Clara laughed. You talked to him for 30 seconds. Sometimes that's all you need to know who a person really is. David's visit left Clara unsettled in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not because she had any desire to return to him. That possibility had died definitively the moment she saw clearly what kind of man he truly was. But because his presence had forced her to confront issues she had been avoiding. Was she limiting herself? Did Oxford really offer the opportunities she needed to grow professionally? And more disturbingly, was she using the city as a way to hide from the world, to avoid real risks? These questions haunted her for the next week, Even as she immersed herself in wedding planning, she had decided on a menu that celebrated the evolution of English cuisine, dishes rooted in medieval tradition, but refined over the centuries. It was ambitious, complex, and exactly the kind of project that excited and terrified her in equal measure. It was while testing a modern version of syllabub, a traditional 17th century dessert, that she received a call that would change everything. Clara Evans? The voice was professional, with an American accent. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm the executive producer of the Food Network's Culinary Discoveries. I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity that might interest you. Clara almost dropped the whisk she was using. Excuse me, did you say Food Network? That's right. We're producing a special series about emerging chefs who are revitalizing local culinary traditions. One of our researchers came across your work online. Apparently, some people posted videos of your dishes on Instagram and TikTok, and they caught our attention. Clara was stunned. She didn't even know people were recording her cooking and posting it online. We'd love to talk to you about participating in the program. It would be an incredible opportunity to showcase your work to an international audience. This is very unexpected, Clara stammered. May I ask what kind of participation would be required? The film crew would come to you for a week. We would film you working, preparing special dishes, telling your story. It's about authenticity, about passion, about people doing something unique in their communities. After she hung up the phone, Clara stood in the kitchen trying to process what had just happened. An opportunity on the Food Network. It was the kind of exposure most chefs dream of. The kind of platform that could transform their small local operation into something much bigger. But it was also terrifying. It meant exposing himself to national scrutiny, risking failure on a scale far greater than anything he had faced before. She needed someone to talk to. Margaret was visiting a friend, so Clara picked up the phone and called Julian. "Can you come here?" she asked when he answered. "Something came up and I need a second opinion." Julian arrived in 15 minutes, finding Clara pacing in circles in the living room, clearly agitated. "What happened?" he asked immediately. Clara talked about the call, the Food Network offer, and her mixed emotions. Julian listened without interrupting, his expression becoming more serious as she spoke. "So," he said when she finished, "how do you feel about this?" "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but also excited? It's an incredible opportunity, but what if I'm not ready? What if I accept it and find I can't handle the pressure?" Julian approached her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Clara, listen. 2 weeks ago you were worried about selling tartines at a local market. Now you're planning the catering for a wedding for 150 people, and the Food Network wants to make a show about you. Don't you think maybe it's time to stop questioning whether you're good enough and start accepting that you are exceptional? What if I fail? What if you succeed?" Clara looked at him, seeing absolute trust in his eyes. "Do you really believe I should do this?" "I believe you should do what feels right for you, but Clara, if you don't try, you'll wonder, what if, for the rest of your life." That night, Clara could barely sleep. She lay awake weighing the pros and cons, running through scenarios, trying to decide if she was ready to take such a big leap. The next morning, she called Marcus Chen back. "I accept," she said before she could change her mind. "When do you want to start?" The shoot was scheduled for 3 weeks from now, right after the wedding. Clara would have to work on the most important project of her emerging career, knowing it would be immediately followed by national exposure. It was immense pressure, but also a motivation she had never felt before. As she hung up the phone, Clara realized something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the scared woman who had returned to Oxford a few months ago. She was becoming someone new, someone willing to take risks, to bet on herself, to pursue opportunities even when they terrified her. It was scary. It was thrilling. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt alive. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of intense preparation. Clara was torn between finalizing all the wedding details and preparing for the Food Network shoot, which had become too real to ignore when the pre-production team arrived to scout the location. Marcus Chen revealed himself to be a man in his 40s, energetic and professional, but with a gentleness that immediately reassured Clara. He explained that the show would focus on her story, a woman returning to her roots after personal adversity and finding passion and purpose through reinterpreted traditional cuisine. "It's a powerful narrative," he said as he surveyed Margaret's kitchen and made notes about additional equipment they would need to bring. "Authentic, inspiring, but also about real talent. Our viewers respond to stories of resilience, especially when they're accompanied by incredible food." Clara felt a shiver of anxiety. What if my story isn't interesting enough? What if I disappoint during filming? "Clara," Marcus said gently, "you wouldn't have made it this far if you didn't have something special. Trust yourself." Meanwhile, wedding preparations intensified. Clara had rented a commercial kitchen in Oxford for the event and spent days making detailed lists, precise timelines, and testing every dish until it was perfect. Julian volunteered to help with logistics, revealing an organizational skill Clara hadn't expected. "Have you ever thought about changing careers?" she joked as he created a color-coding system to track all the menu components. "Architecture is basically complex project management," Julian replied. "Except instead of food, I work with concrete and steel." The forced closeness of wedding preparations made Clara realize how much she had come to rely on Julian. He didn't just help with practical tasks. He also offered perspective when she felt overwhelmed, humor when she became too serious, and a constant presence that made her feel less alone. It was during one of these long planning sessions that Clara realized Julian had become more than a friend to her. He was explaining something about traffic flow at the wedding venue, gesturing animatedly with his hands, and Clara found herself focusing not on his words, but on the way his mouth moved, the way his eyes lit up when he was focused. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. She was falling in love with him. The thought terrified her. She had returned to Oxford specifically to heal, to focus on her burgeoning career, to avoid relationships. And now she was developing deep feelings for the very person closest to her at the most vulnerable moment of her life. "Clara?" Julian was looking at her with concern. "Are you okay? You've suddenly become very pale." I'm just a little tired," she lied. "Too many things going on at once." Julian nodded understandingly. "Maybe we should call it a day. You need your rest." But Clara couldn't rest that night. She lay awake mulling over her feelings, trying to decide what to do with them. Julian had never indicated that he saw her as anything more than a friend. Was she projecting her own feelings onto kindnesses that were simply a result of her caring nature? The next morning, Margaret confronted her over breakfast. "You're in love with him," she said without preamble. Clara nearly choked on her tea. "What are you talking about?" "By Julian, of course. It's written all over his face every time he shows up here. And before you deny it, I'm 70 years old and I've seen this look many times before." Clara sighed, realizing there was no point in denying it. "Is it that obvious?" "For me? Yes. For him? Hard to say. Men can be notoriously obtuse when it comes to these things." "It doesn't matter," Clara said, trying to sound resolute. "I can't afford any emotional complications right now. I have too much at stake." Margaret studied her with discerning eyes. "Honey, you can try to separate your heart and mind. But in my experience, they have a way of influencing each other, whether you like it or not. The question is whether you'll be honest about your feelings or whether you'll let fear make your decisions for you. What if he doesn't feel the same way? What if this ruins our friendship just when I need support the most? What if he feels the same way, and you missed out on something wonderful because you were afraid to take the risk?" It was a question Clara couldn't answer, so she buried herself even deeper in work. With only 5 days until the wedding, every moment was precious. She spent entire mornings testing recipes, afternoons organizing supplies, and nights reviewing schedules. It was during one of these nights that she received an unexpected call from Helen Morrison. "Clara, there's a problem," Helen said bluntly. "The venue we were going to use for preparation flooded today because of a plumbing problem. It won't be available for the wedding." Clara felt her heart stop. "What does this mean?" "It means we need to find an alternative space to prepare the food, and we need to find it fast. The wedding is in 5 days." After hanging up, Clara sat in Margaret's kitchen trying not to panic. She had planned everything based on the commercial kitchen's specific layout and equipment. How could she replicate an event for 150 people elsewhere with so little planning time? His phone rang again. "Julian, I heard about the problem with the kitchen," he said immediately. "Helen called me. Are you okay?" "I don't know what I'm going to do," Clara admitted, her voice shaking. "There are no other commercial kitchens available with such short notice." Actually, Julian said slowly, I have an idea. It might be crazy, but it might work. I'll accept anything at this point. My family's architecture office is in the same building as an event space my father designed years ago. It has a full professional kitchen that is rarely used. I can speak to the owners. Clara felt a surge of hope. You would do that? Clara, of course I would. We'll work this out, okay? You're not alone. Once again, Julian appeared as her savior in her time of greatest need. As she hung up the phone, Clara wondered what this said about her, that she was always in need of rescuing, or that she had finally found someone who would be there for her when things got tough. The space Julian secured was even better than the original kitchen. Located in a restored historic building in downtown Oxford, it had state-of-the-art equipment and enough space for the entire operation Clara had planned. Most importantly, the owners, longtime friends of the Hayes family, were happy to help, especially after Julian explained the situation. I don't know how to thank you, Clara said as they inspected the space the next morning. You saved the whole project. Julian shook his head. You would have found a solution. You always find a way. Clara looked at him, touched by the confidence in his voice. How can you be so sure? Because I know you, Clara. You're the most determined person I know. When you want something, you find a way to get it. There was something about the way he said it that made Clara wonder if they were still just talking about cooking. The next 3 days passed in a haze of frenetic activity. Clara practically moved into the new kitchen, arriving before dawn and leaving well after dusk. Julian dropped by whenever he could, helping with tasks ranging from carrying supplies to tasting new dishes. The night before the wedding, Clara was making the final preparations when she noticed Julian had gone quiet. She looked at him and saw a thoughtful expression on his face. Are you okay? She asked. Julian hesitated. Clara, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? Here in Oxford, with what you are building. The question caught her off guard. Why are you asking that? Because tomorrow, after the wedding, you're going to have the Food Network crew here. That could change everything for you. It could open doors you never even imagined. And I was wondering, if that happens, if you have opportunities elsewhere, would you take them? Clara studied his face, trying to understand what he was really asking. Are you asking if I'm leaving again? I hope you'll do what's best for you, Julian said carefully. But I can't deny that the idea of you leaving again worries me. Because? Julian looked her straight in the eye. Because I've grown accustomed to having you around. Because you've become an important part of my life, and because... He paused as if debating whether to continue. Why? Because I'm in love with you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating at the same time. Clara felt her heart race, a mixture of joy and terror coursing through her veins. Julian, I know the timing is terrible, he continued quickly. I know you have a lot at stake right now, that you're focused on your career. I'm not asking anything of you. I needed you to know. Clara looked at him, seeing complete vulnerability in his eyes. This was Julian stripped of his carefully constructed defenses, offering his heart without guarantees. I don't know what to say, she murmured. You don't have to say anything right now, Julian said gently. You have a wedding tomorrow, and the shoot next week. I just wanted you to know how I feel before all this happens. He approached her, gently touching her face with one hand. Get some sleep tonight, okay? Tomorrow is your big day. After Julian left, Clara was left alone in the kitchen, surrounded by preparations for the next day, trying to process what had just happened. Julian was in love with her. The words she had secretly longed to hear, but also the words that complicated everything. Because the truth was, she was in love with him too. Completely, irrevocably in love. But tomorrow she would be professionally tested in a way she had never been before. And next week her entire life could change depending on how the shoot went. How could she navigate all of this at once? The wedding day dawned bright and cold, with that crystalline quality of December air that made everything seem sharper, more intense. Clara arrived in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, finding her team of temporary assistants already waiting. Over the previous weeks, she had recruited 3 local culinary students and 2 experienced women who worked part-time in catering. Good morning, everyone, Clara said, trying to project more confidence than she felt. You know your roles. Let's create something memorable today. The first few hours passed without a hitch. Each dish was executed according to the carefully planned schedule, each component prepared with the precision Clara had practiced for weeks. By 11 in the morning, she was beginning to believe she might be able to pull it all off without any major disasters. It was then that Helen Morrison arrived, looking agitated. "Clara, we have a problem," she said. "The bride has decided she wants to change the main course. She no longer wants lamb, she wants fish. And she wants it to be something more spectacular than the salmon we discussed as an alternative." Clara felt her stomach drop. Changing a main course for 150 people 3 hours before service was nearly impossible, especially for something spectacular she hadn't planned or tested. "What kind of fish does she want?" Clara asked, trying to remain calm. She mentioned that she would like something like those chefs do on TV, something that will impress the guests. Clara closed her eyes, trying to think. She had enough salmon in the freezer for a simple preparation, but nothing that could be described as spectacular, unless an idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, ambitious, and required a technique she'd only practiced a few times. But if it worked, it would be truly spectacular. "I have an idea," she said to Helen, "but I'll need some additional ingredients quickly." Julian appeared as if summoned, carrying flowers to the tables. "Julian," Clara called, "I need your help. Urgently." She quickly explained the situation and what she needed. Julian didn't hesitate. "Give me the list," he said. "I know every supplier in town. I'll get you what you need." While Julian scrambled for ingredients, Clara completely reorganized her operation. She decided to prepare herb-crusted salmon using the individual en papillote technique, but in a dramatic presentation that would involve opening the papillotes in front of the guests, releasing aromatic steam that would fill the room with the scents of lemon, fresh dill, and white wine. It was technically challenging and visually stunning, exactly the kind of thing that could be a spectacular triumph or a complete disaster. Julian returned in record time with everything on the list, plus some additional herbs he thought might be useful. "How can I help more?" he asked, seeing the frenetic activity in the kitchen. "You can stay close," Clara said, briefly touching his hand. "Knowing you're here helps me focus." The next 2 hours were the most intense of Clara's professional life. Each papillote had to be perfectly assembled, each seal tested to ensure it wouldn't leak, each timing calculated down to the second so that all the dishes came out simultaneously at the perfect temperature. When it was time to serve the main course, Clara was shaking with adrenaline and nerves. The service staff carried the covered trays into the dining room, and Clara followed them to watch the moment of revelation. Helen had instructed the waiters on the presentation. At her signal, they simultaneously removed the covers and opened the papillotes, releasing clouds of fragrant steam that spread throughout the room. The effect was exactly what Clara had imagined. The guests broke into spontaneous applause, impressed both by the theatrical performance and by the incredible aroma that filled the hall. Clara saw the bride clasp her hands in joy and felt a wave of relief and pride that nearly knocked her over. "You did it," Julian murmured in her ear, appearing behind her. "It was absolutely perfect." Clara turned to him, tears of relief in her eyes. "We did it. I never would have done it without you." Julian smiled, and for a moment they looked at each other as if they were the only people in the world. Then Clara remembered where they were and forced herself to focus again. The rest of the dinner went flawlessly. Each course was enthusiastically received, the desserts were effusively praised, and Helen Morrison came back to her at the end of the evening with a radiant smile. "Clara, it was extraordinary," she said. "Absolutely extraordinary. I already have 3 people inquiring about your services for future events." After the last guests left and the cleaning crew took over, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen with Julian. She was exhausted but elated, still processing the evening's success. "Do you know what that means?" Julian asked, seeing her expression. "That maybe I actually know what I'm doing? That you're brilliant? And now everyone knows it." Clara looked at him, remembering their conversation from the night before. "Julian, about what you said yesterday. You don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "But I want to," Clara said, taking a step closer to him. "You need to know. I'm in love with you too." Julian's face lit up with surprise and joy. "You are?" "I am." Completely. But Julian, I'm terrified. Why? Because I don't know what will happen after filming. Because I don't know if I'm ready for another big change in my life. Because I'm afraid of messing this up like I've messed up so many things before. Julian placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Clara, you didn't break anything. You survived things that would have destroyed most people. You came home and built something beautiful from nothing. You are the strongest, bravest person I know. What if I'm not strong enough for that either? Then we'll figure it out together, Julian said simply. It doesn't have to be perfect, Clara. It just has to be real. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and tender, and Clara felt something warm inside her that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with coming home. This was Julian, the boy she had known as a child, the man who had chosen to stand by her side when she needed him most, the person who saw her strength when she could only see her flaws. When they parted, Clara knew her life had changed again, not only because of the night's professional success, but because of the honest admission of the feelings they had both held back for so long. So, Julian said with a mischievous grin, ready to conquer the Food Network? Clara laughed, feeling more ready for anything than she had in years. The Food Network film crew arrived the following Monday as a small army of efficient professionals. In addition to Marcus Chen, there was a director of photography, 2 sound technicians, a production assistant, and a secondary director specializing in cooking shows. They transformed Margaret's kitchen and the space Clara had used for the wedding into film sets, with sophisticated lighting equipment and multiple strategically placed cameras. The concept is simple, Marcus explained during the first production meeting. We want to capture you being authentic, cooking the way you cook, talking about your passion, telling your story. We don't want you to act, we want you to be yourself. It was easier said than done. Clara found that having cameras pointed at her while she cooked was deeply destabilizing. Every movement felt artificial, every word sounded forced. During the first few hours of filming, she was tense and uncomfortable, clearly not delivering the kind of natural content the crew needed. Marcus called a break. Clara, you need to relax, forget the cameras, just cook like you're cooking for friends. It's just that I've never cooked with 8 people watching me, Clara admitted. It's intimidating. It was Julian who offered the solution. He had been quietly in the background during filming, trying not to interfere, but now he approached Marcus. Can I suggest something? He asked. What if I stood in the kitchen with her, like she was teaching me how to make the dishes? It might help her feel more natural. Marcus considered the idea. Actually, that could work really well. It adds an interesting relationship dynamic. You two have a natural chemistry that would make for good television. Clara looked at Julian gratefully. Once again, he had found a way to support her exactly when she needed it. The next filming sessions were completely different. With Julian as her student, Clara relaxed naturally as she explained the dishes, telling stories about where she learned each technique, why she chose specific ingredients, and how each recipe connected to personal memories or local traditions. This risotto, she explained as she stirred the rice slowly, I learned from an Italian lady in London who worked in the same building as me. She taught me that patience is the most important ingredient. You can't rush the process. You have to let each grain absorb the broth slowly. How do you know when it's ready? Julian asked, genuinely interested. By texture. It should be creamy but still have a bit of resistance when you bite into it. And by color, it should be pale golden, not dull white or brown. Marcus nodded to the director. This kind of natural interaction was exactly what they wanted. During the week of filming, Clara told her full story to the cameras. Her ambitious departure from Oxford, her career in international consulting, the cancer diagnosis that had changed her perspective on everything, the end of her marriage, her decision to return home and start over through cooking. What does cooking mean to you now? Marcus asked during one of the interviews. Clara thought carefully before answering. It represents connection, to my heritage, to my community, to myself. When I was going through cancer treatment, I lost a lot of what I thought defined me. My career, my marriage, my confidence. But when I started cooking again, I remembered who I really was beneath all those other identities. And go back to Oxford? It was like rediscovering a version of myself that I had forgotten existed. The Clara who experimented without fear, who found joy in simple things, who believed she could create something beautiful. The team also filmed Clara at the market, interacting with local vendors and customers, demonstrating how she had integrated into the community. They recorded testimonials from Sarah Mitchell, Helen Morrison, and several customers who spoke about Clara's impact on Oxford. "She brought something special back to our city," Sarah told the camera. "A creativity and passion that inspires all of us to think differently about food, about tradition, about what it means to truly nourish people." Julian was also interviewed, and Clara was touched by the way he spoke about her. "Clara has this gift of taking things that are familiar and finding something new and exciting in them," he said. "But more than that, she has courage. The courage to start over when life has knocked her down, the courage to bet on herself when others might have given up." "And personally, how do you see her?" Julian smiled. "I see her as someone extraordinary, who is still discovering just how extraordinary she is." On the penultimate night of filming, Marcus organized a special dinner where Clara would cook for the production crew and some local residents. It was meant to be the show's grand finale, showing Clara in her element, creating a meal that represented everything she had learned about herself and about cooking. Clara planned a menu that told the story of her journey, dishes that combined techniques she'd learned during her travels with local ingredients and traditions. It was ambitious and personal, each dish imbued with meaning. When it came time to serve, Clara felt more confident than she had throughout the entire week of filming. This was her art, her passion, her way of communicating with the world. The dinner was an absolute success. Every dish was received with genuine enthusiasm, not only by the professional staff but also by the neighbors and friends who had become part of their new life in Oxford. After the last guests left, Marcus approached Clara. "This was exceptional," he said. "Honestly, it's one of the best episodes we've ever filmed. Your story is powerful, your food is incredible, and you have a presence on camera that is both vulnerable and strong. This will resonate with a lot of people." Clara felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. "When will it air?" "In about 6 weeks. But Clara, I want you to know, this could change everything for you. You should be prepared for a lot of interest, opportunities you can't even imagine yet." That night, after the film crew had packed up all their equipment and retired to the hotel, Clara found herself alone with Julian in Margaret's kitchen, processing everything that had happened. "How do you feel?" Julian asked. "Vulnerable," Clara admitted. "Like I'd completely exposed myself for the world to see." "And that scares you?" Clara considered the question. "Yes and no. It's scary because it means there's no going back. But it's also liberating. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm being completely honest about who I am and what I want." Julian pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. You've been amazing this week. Even when I was having a nervous breakdown on the second day?" Julian laughed. "Especially then. You've shown that you're human, but you've also shown that you can overcome obstacles." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Julian, what happens now?" Marcus was right. This could open many doors. What if some of those doors are far from Oxford? Then we'll find out, Julian said simply. "Clara, I won't be the one who stops you from pursuing your dreams. If amazing opportunities present themselves, you should consider them. What if I want you to come with me?" Julian smiled. "Then I would consider that too. Even if it meant leaving Oxford, leaving your family business?" "Clara," Julian said seriously, "I spent years living the life others expected of me, doing the responsible thing, following the path that had been laid out for me. But being with you reminded me what it's like to follow my heart. If my heart takes me far from here, I'll trust it." Clara felt something settle inside her, a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Not about the future, which was still uncertain, but about the present, about the choices she'd made and the people she'd chosen to have in her life. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Julian replied. And for the first time since returning to Oxford, Clara felt completely at home, not just in a place, but in her own skin, in her own choices, in the love she had found when she least expected it. The following weeks brought a strange sense of anticlimax. After the intensity of filming, life returned to a more normal pace, but Clara found she couldn't simply return to her previous routine. Something had fundamentally changed during that week. Not just her professional confidence, but her vision of herself and what was possible. She continued catering for Sarah's cafe and accepted 2 more catering events, but found herself dreaming bigger. The show hadn't aired yet, but Marcus had stayed in touch, sending her updates on post-production and suggestions on how she should prepare for the upcoming show. "You should consider writing a cookbook," he suggested during one of their phone conversations. "There are publishers who would be very interested in your concept of reinterpreted culinary traditions." "A cookbook?" Clara repeated, barely able to believe the suggestion. A few months ago, she was selling tartines at a local market, and now someone was suggesting she write a book. "Think about it," Marcus continued. "You have a compelling story, original recipes, and a unique approach. And after the show airs, you'll have the necessary name recognition." Clara mentioned the conversation to Julian that night, as they ate dinner at the little Italian restaurant they had adopted as their special place. "What do you think?" she asked. "Is it too ambitious?" Julian shook his head. "Clara, 6 months ago you thought selling locally was ambitious. Look where you are now. Maybe it's time to stop questioning whether you're good enough and start questioning how far you want to go." "It's scary," she admitted. "Everything is changing so quickly. But it's a good change, isn't it?" Clara smiled. "Yes, it's a nice change." They were leaving the restaurant when Clara saw a familiar face across the street. Rebecca Thornton, clearly heading toward them with purpose. "Oh no," Clara muttered. "Who is it?" Julian asked, following her gaze. "Rebecca Thornton. The woman who confronted me about, well, you remember." Rebecca reached them before they could avoid her, her perfectly calculated smile firmly in place. "Clara, Julian," she exclaimed as if they were old friends. "What a coincidence to meet you both here." "Rebecca," Clara said cautiously. "How are you?" "Wonderfully well. I'm actually really excited to talk to you. I heard through the gossip network that you're going to be on the Food Network." "How exciting." Clara wondered how Rebecca had found out. She had been very careful to keep the footage discreet. "How did you know about this?" Julian asked, clearly thinking the same thing. Rebecca laughed. "Oh dear, it's a small town. People talk. And when an international television crew shows up in town, well, it's hard to keep it a secret." Clara sighed internally. She had hoped for more time before the news got out. "Anyway," Rebecca continued, "I was thinking maybe we could collaborate. My advertising agency has a lot of experience with brand management for emerging personalities. I could help you capitalize on all this exposure the right way." "Thank you, but I'm not looking for representation at the moment," Clara said politely. "Oh, but you should be," Rebecca insisted. "Clara, you're about to become a celebrity. You need someone who understands how to navigate this, how to maximize opportunities, someone who knows the market." Clara felt the familiar irritation Rebecca always provoked in her. "I can mind my own business, thank you." Sure, Rebecca said, with that condescending smile Clara remembered from school. "But wouldn't it be smarter to get professional help? Especially considering what happened with your last professional adventure in London." Julian stepped forward. "Rebecca, I think Clara was quite clear. She's not interested." Rebecca looked between them, calculating. "You two are a couple now then? How cute." "Julian, you've always been protective of your friends." "Clara isn't just a friend," Julian said firmly. "And yes, I am protective of the people I love." For a moment, Rebecca's smile faltered. Then she recovered. "Well, how romantic. I hope it works out for you two. And Clara, if you ever change your mind about professional representation, you know where to find me." After Rebecca walked away, Clara turned to Julian. "Thank you for this." "Why?" "For standing up for me. For saying you love me. In public." Julian smiled. "Clara, I love you. Why would I hide it?" Clara felt a wave of warmth in her chest. David had never been like this. Protective, proud to be with her, willing to publicly defend her. It was a new and wonderful feeling. "I love you too," she said, kissing him right there on the street. In the days that followed, Clara discovered Rebecca had been right about one thing. Word about the Food Network had spread. She began receiving phone calls from people she hadn't heard from in years. Congratulations mixed with unsolicited suggestions and offers of collaboration. More significantly, she began receiving inquiries from legitimate professionals, editors interested in discussing potential book projects, restaurant owners wanting to explore consulting opportunities, event planners wanting to book her months in advance. It's overwhelming, she confessed to Margaret over dinner. I don't know how to process all these possibilities. You don't have to decide everything now, Margaret said pragmatically. But you should be documenting everything, every offer, every contact. You'll want to review your options carefully when the show airs. What if I choose wrong? Margaret laughed. Honey, at this point in your life, there are no wrong choices, just different experiences. The important thing is to choose things that make you feel alive and authentic. That night, Clara was organizing all the contacts and proposals she'd received when her phone rang. The name on the screen made her hesitate. It was a London number she didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Clara Evans? The voice was professional, British, unfamiliar. Yes, it's me. My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm an executive producer at the BBC. I'd like to talk to you about a possible opportunity. Clara sat up straight. The BBC? What kind of opportunity? We're developing a new series about young chefs revitalizing regional culinary traditions in the UK. We heard about your work through some mutual industry contacts, and we're very interested in talking to you about participating. Clara listened to the details. It would be a 6-episode series, each focusing on a different chef, with individual 30-minute episodes following each person as they explored and reinterpreted the culinary traditions of their region. The concept for your episode would be Oxford Reimagined. You would explore the rich culinary history of the university and the city, and show how you are bringing those traditions into the 21st century. It was an incredible opportunity, national exposure in the UK, a platform to establish his professional credibility, recognition as an authority in his field. That sounds fascinating, Clara said. When would you need an answer? There's no rush, Victoria said. But we'd be looking to film in late winter, early spring. If you're interested, we can set up a meeting to discuss details. After she hung up, Clara stood in Margaret's kitchen, trying to process yet another surreal opportunity. A few months ago, she was hiding from her failed life, and now both the American Food Network and the British BBC wanted to work with her. His phone rang again. Julian, how was your day? He asked. Complicated, Clara said. Julian, can you come here? I need to talk to someone about some things. When Julian arrived, Clara told him about the call from the BBC, about all the other offers she had received, about how she felt simultaneously blessed and overwhelmed. That's amazing, Julian said after she finished. Clara, this is exactly the kind of recognition you deserve. But I don't know how to choose between all these options, and I don't know how to evaluate what's real versus what's just hype. Julian thought for a moment. How about we make a list? Pros and cons of each opportunity, what each would mean for your long-term career, what each would require of you personally. They spent the next hour doing just that, creating a framework for Clara to evaluate her options logically rather than emotionally. The most important thing, Julian said when they were done, is that you choose things that are consistent with who you want to become, not just who you are now. Clara looked at him, once again impressed by his practical wisdom. How do you always know the right thing to say? Maybe because I know you well, Julian said simply, and because I want you to be happy. What if some of these opportunities take me away from Oxford? Away from you? Julian took her hands. Clara, we'll figure out how to make this work. But you can't make career decisions based on fear of complicating our relationship. If we're truly right for each other, we'll find a way. Clara leaned in and kissed him, grateful once again to have someone in her life who supported her unconditionally. I love you for this, she murmured against his lips. Why? For loving me enough to let me fly. The Food Network show aired on a Thursday night in late January. Clara hosted a small viewing party at Margaret's house, inviting Julian, Sarah Mitchell, Helen Morrison, and a few other close friends who had become part of her Oxford life. I can't watch, Clara declared 5 minutes before the show started, pacing nervously around the room. What if it's terrible? What if I look like an idiot on national television? You will watch, Margaret said firmly, because you worked hard for this and deserve to see the results. Julian pulled her onto the couch beside him. It'll be okay, he murmured. I saw you filming. You were natural and brilliant. When the show began, Clara forced herself to look at the screen. The first few moments were surreal, seeing her own face, hearing her own voice narrating her story. But gradually she relaxed, realizing that the editing had captured exactly what she had hoped to communicate. The narrative followed her journey back to Oxford, showing her at the market, in the kitchen, and interacting with the local community. The interviews were edited sensitively, focusing on her resilience and passion rather than dramatizing her past trauma. "My God, Clara," Sarah breathed when they showed the segment at the Owl's Nest. "You look like an absolute pro." The cooking section was the best part. Clara watched herself explain techniques, tell stories about each dish, and laugh naturally with Julian as they cooked together. The chemistry between them was obvious and charming, and Clara understood why Marcus had insisted on including Julian in the footage. When the program ended, there was a moment of absolute silence in the room. Then everyone began speaking at once, offering enthusiastic congratulations and praise. "That was amazing," Helen said. "Absolutely amazing. You should be so proud." But the first real reaction would come in the next few hours. Before Clara even went to bed, her phone had started ringing incessantly. Emails were pouring in. Her simple website, which she had created a few weeks earlier, was being flooded with traffic. The next morning, Clara woke up to over 50 emails from people wanting to hire her services, 17 voicemails from journalists wanting interviews, and 3 offers from literary agents interested in representing her for a potential cookbook. "This is insanity," she said to Julian as they reviewed the messages over breakfast. "It's a success," Julian corrected. "You touched people." The show was authentic and inspiring. One of the calls was from Marcus Chen, congratulating her on the response to the program. "Clara, the feedback has been extraordinary," he said. "The show had one of the highest ratings of the season, and the response on social media has been fantastic. You really connected with people. What does this practically mean?" "It means you now have a national platform. The opportunities you receive in the coming weeks will be far greater in scale than anything you've seen before." Marcus was right. In the following days, the offers became increasingly significant. A respected publisher offered her a book deal with a substantial advance. A restaurant chain wanted to hire her as a consultant to develop an Oxford-inspired menu concept. 2 other television networks wanted to discuss potential projects. More personally, Clara began receiving messages from people who had been touched by her story. Other cancer survivors who found inspiration in her journey. People who had gone through difficult divorces and found strength in rebuilding. Young chefs who wanted advice on pursuing their culinary dreams. "Listen to this," Clara said to Julian, reading a private email. "Dear Clara, I watched your show last night and cried. 3 years ago, I had a double mastectomy and completely lost my confidence. My husband was wonderful, but I felt like I wasn't myself anymore. Seeing you talk about rebuilding your life after cancer, about finding joy again in creating, gave me hope that I, too, can find a new version of myself. Thank you for being so brave and sharing your story." Clara stopped reading, tears welling up in her eyes. "Julian, this is what moves me most. It's not the professional opportunities, it's knowing my story helped someone." "You've touched many lives," Julian said gently, "and this is just the beginning." By the end of the week, Clara had received so many offers and opportunities that she knew she needed professional help to properly evaluate them. She decided to hire a reputable agent recommended by Marcus, someone who specialized in emerging culinary personalities. Also that week, she received an unexpected call. "Clara, I'm Victoria Sterling from the BBC. You talked a few weeks ago about our show." "Yes, of course, how are you?" "Wonderfully well. In fact, I watched your show on the Food Network last night. It was absolutely captivating, and it got me thinking, maybe we should expand on our original pitch." Clara felt a shiver of curiosity. "Expand how?" "Instead of just one episode in our series, we're interested in offering you your own show. Clara's Kitchen, Traditions Reinvented. 6 one-hour episodes with you exploring different regions of the UK and their culinary traditions, showing you how to adapt them for modern cooks." Clara almost dropped the phone. Her own show, on the BBC. That's amazing," she stammered. "But I've never hosted a television show before." "But you have a natural presence on camera and a compelling story. And most importantly, you have real knowledge and genuine passion. That's what matters." After she hung up, Clara sat in Margaret's kitchen, trying to process yet another surreal opportunity. In a matter of a week, She had gone from local chef to potential national television personality. Margaret walked into the kitchen and immediately noticed Clara's stunned expression. What happened now? Clara told her about the BBC's proposal. Margaret listened thoughtfully, then nodded. And what do you want to do? I don't know, Clara admitted. It's an incredible opportunity, but it also means a lot more public exposure, a lot more pressure. And it would probably mean spending months away from Oxford, away from you and Julian. Margaret sat at the kitchen table. Clara, can I tell you a story? Clara nodded. When I was 30, I received an offer to work as a textile designer for a company in Paris. It was my dream, to work in the fashion capital of the world, designing for some of the most prestigious houses. But your Uncle George had just proposed to me, and Oxford was our home. I was afraid that if I went to Paris, I would lose everything I had built here. What did you do? I declined the offer. And you know what happened? George would have come with me. We would have figured out a way to make it work. But I was so focused on what I could lose that I failed to see all the possibilities of what I could gain. Margaret took Clara's hand. I don't regret the life I've had. It was a good life, full of love and joy. But sometimes I wonder who I could have become if I'd been braver. Are you saying I should accept? I'm saying you should make the decision based on what you want, not what you're afraid of losing. That night, Clara talked at length with Julian about all the opportunities that were opening up. They walked the familiar streets of Oxford, passing the places that had become significant in her journey. The market where she had sold her first tartines, the cafe where Julian had defended her against Rebecca, the building where they had cooked together for the Food Network cameras. Julian, Clara said finally, if I accept some of these opportunities, the BBC show, the book deal, the consulting projects, it will mean a lot of traveling, a lot of weeks away from Oxford. I know. And that doesn't bother you? Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. Clara, you want to know what would bother me? To see you reject incredible opportunities because you're afraid of complicating our relationship. To see you in 5 years wondering what if because you chose security over growth. But what about us? We'll find out, Julian said with conviction. Clara, I love you exactly as you are, but I also love your ambition, your passion, your willingness to dream big. If you start making yourself smaller to fit into my life, you wouldn't be the Clara I fell in love with anymore. Clara felt tears in her eyes. How do you always know exactly the right thing to say? Because I know you, and because I want you to fly as high as you can. They stopped in front of Julian's office, lit by the soft light of the old street lamps. Actually, Julian said slowly, I have a confession to make. Which? I've been thinking about making some changes in my own life. The family office is going well, but I've found myself dreaming about different projects. Projects that combine architecture with hospitality, designing spaces for restaurants, hotels, places where people gather to share experiences. Clara looked at him in surprise. Julian, that's amazing. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I didn't have the courage to pursue them until I saw you pursuing your own dreams. You inspired me to think about who I want to be, not just who I'm expected to be. Clara felt something expand in her chest. Not just love for Julian, but deep admiration for her own courage and the way they were supporting each other to grow. So we're both at transition points, she said. It seems so. What if we do this together? If I pursue these opportunities and you pursue your new projects and we figure out how to support each other in the process? Julian smiled. That sounds like exactly the kind of adventure I want to have with you. Clara approached him, feeling a clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. Julian, I think I know what I want to do. What? Everything. I want to accept the BBC program. I want to write the book. I want to grow professionally in every way possible. And I want to do it with you by my side, not holding me back, but growing with me. Julian pulled her into a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. Then let's do this, he murmured against her lips. Let's build the life we want, not the life we think we should want. The following months were a whirlwind of activity and change. Clara accepted the BBC program and spent 6 weeks filming in different regions of the UK, exploring culinary traditions from Cornwall to Scotland. Julian accompanied her on some of the shoot, combining work trips to explore hospitality design projects in various cities. The book deal materialized into Roots Reimagined, A Culinary Journey Back Home, which Clara wrote between shoots, spilling not just recipes but stories, her own and those of people she'd met along her journey. During this period, Julian also made significant changes. He gradually handed over his responsibilities at the family office to his younger brother and began developing his own consultancy, specializing in hospitality space design. His first projects included 2 restaurants in London and a boutique hotel in Bath. "It's strange," Clara said one May afternoon as she proofread her book in the new home they had bought together, a renovated cottage on the outskirts of Oxford that served as both her residence and her recipe testing studio. "A year ago I was terrified of change, and now it seems like change is the only constant in our lives." Julian looked up from his drawing board where he was sketching designs for what would become Clara's own restaurant, a project that had emerged organically from conversations about the future. "But these are changes we choose," he pointed out, "changes that move us toward who we want to be." The restaurant had become their most exciting project. Using a combination of Clara's culinary expertise and Julian's eye for design, they were creating a space that would be simultaneously intimately local and sophisticatedly cosmopolitan. The menu would celebrate regional ingredients prepared with techniques Clara had learned during her travels, both for the book and the television show. "Have you thought of a name?" Julian asked. Clara smiled. "Actually, yes. Hearth. Home Hearth. Because it's about coming home, but also about creating a home for others." Julian nodded appreciatively. "Perfect. Captures everything you want to communicate." Building and planning the restaurant brought its own challenges. There were financing issues to resolve, permits to obtain, and staff to hire and train. But this time, Clara faced each obstacle with confidence rather than fear. She had learned that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. There were also moments of personal tension, weeks when they were both traveling for projects, communicating primarily through late-night video calls and hurried texts. Periods when the pressure of building parallel careers left little time for their relationship. "Are we okay?" Clara asked one particularly difficult night, when Julian had returned from a business trip in Edinburgh, the same day Clara had returned from filming in Wales. Both of them exhausted and slightly cranky. Julian pulled her onto the couch beside him. "We're more than okay. We're building something incredible together. But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy all the time. Sometimes I worry that we're changing so quickly that we'll grow in different directions. And sometimes I worry about the same thing," Julian admitted. "But then I look at how we support each other, how we celebrate each other's successes, how we face challenges together, and I realize we're growing in the same direction, just growing a lot." It was true. Despite the logistical challenges, their relationship had deepened during the year of change. They had learned to communicate across time zones, to support each other's ambitions even when it meant time apart, to find joy in shared victories. In July, Clara's BBC show aired. The response was even more positive than the Food Network episode had been. The British media welcomed her as a refreshing new voice in television cooking, someone who combined genuine knowledge with a warm personality and an ability to make culinary traditions accessible to home cooks. "Clara Evans is not just a talented chef," wrote The Guardian critic. "She is a natural storyteller who makes you want both to taste her food and to hear more of her stories." The show's success brought even more opportunities. Proposals for future shows, offers to open restaurants in other cities, invitations to international culinary events. Clara and Julian spent several evenings discussing which opportunities to pursue and which to politely decline. "The temptation is to say yes to everything," Clara admitted. "But I've learned that quantity of opportunities is not the same thing as quality of life." Julian agreed. "We want to grow, but we want to grow sustainably, in ways that allow us to maintain our sanity and our relationship." They created criteria for decision-making. Opportunities had to align with Clara's values, allow for creative growth, and be logistically manageable within the context of their personal lives. It was a filter that helped them focus on the right opportunities rather than all opportunities. In September, almost a year after the original Food Network filming, Clara received a call that completely surprised her. It was David. "Clara, I saw your show on the BBC. It was really amazing." "Thank you," she said cautiously, wondering why he was calling. "I wanted to congratulate you." And also, I wanted to apologize for what I said when I was in Oxford, for how I acted when you were sick. I was watching you on the show, seeing how strong and successful you've become, and I realized how badly I behaved. Clara was silent for a moment, processing the unexpected apology. I accept your apology, David, but honestly, that's in the past now. I've moved on. I can see that. And Clara, I hope you are very happy. You deserve all the happiness in the world. After she hung up, Clara felt strangely at peace. Not because David's apology had changed anything. She had long ago forgiven and moved on, but because it confirmed how completely she had healed and grown. The woman who had left London hurt and angry was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more self-assured. In October, Hearth opened its doors. The opening night was an intimate affair for 50 guests, family, friends, professional collaborators, and members of the Oxford community who had supported Clara from the beginning. Margaret was there, beaming with pride. Sarah Mitchell brought a bottle of vintage champagne she had saved for a special occasion. Helen Morrison was already discussing potential events she could host in the new space. Clara moved around the room, greeting guests and observing their reactions to the dishes. Each dish on the menu told a story, her personal journey translated into flavors and presentations that were simultaneously sophisticated and warming. "How are you feeling?" Julian asked, finding her during a quiet moment near the kitchen. Clara looked around the room. The space Julian had designed, filled with people who had become important to her, filled with the aromas of food she had lovingly created. It was exactly as she had imagined, but also more real and more satisfying than any dream. "I feel at home," she said simply. "Even with all the changes, all the travel, all the new projects." Clara smiled. "Especially because of all these things. They taught me that home isn't a place. It's a state of being. It's about being at peace with who you are and being surrounded by people who love you for it." Julian pulled her into a discreet hug. "So you're home." "We're home," Clara corrected. 6 months after Hearth opened, Clara stood in the restaurant's kitchen one April morning, preparing for another day of service. The routine had naturally settled in. Mornings planning menus and preparing ingredients, afternoons handling correspondence and media projects, evenings overseeing the restaurant's service. Hearth had become exactly what Clara had hoped for, a place where culinary tradition met modern innovation, where the local community mingled with visitors from far and wide, where every meal was a celebration of seasonal ingredients prepared with skill and love. The reviews had been uniformly positive. The Michelin Guide had given the restaurant a special mention for culinary excellence in a welcoming atmosphere. The Times had included Hearth on its list of new restaurants redefining British cuisine. Most importantly for Clara, the restaurant was always packed with regulars who came not just for the food, but for the full experience of warm hospitality. On that particular morning, Clara was experimenting with a new dessert, a modern take on the traditional English bread pudding that incorporated techniques she'd learned during a recent culinary trip to France. It was for her next book, a collection of seasonal recipes to be published in the fall. Julian walked into the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee and the local newspaper. "Good morning, Chef Evans," he said with a smile, using the title the restaurant staff had adopted for her. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Hayes," Clara replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "How is the hotel project in Bath coming along?" "Almost finished. The client loved the designs, especially the indoor restaurant, which we based on the Hearth concept. It looks like we'll have requests for more similar projects." Julian had established himself as an architect specializing in hospitality spaces, with a growing reputation for designs that combined functionality with a warm atmosphere. His recent projects included 3 restaurants, 2 boutique hotels, and a particularly ambitious project for a culinary resort in Scotland. "Actually," Julian continued, "there's something I want to discuss with you." Clara looked at him, catching something in his voice that suggested this was more than a casual conversation about work. "What is it?" Julian put the newspaper aside and approached her. "I received an interesting proposal yesterday. A developer in Cornwall wants to create a complete culinary destination. Hotel, restaurant, cooking school, all integrated. They want me to do the architectural design, and they want you to be the executive chef and culinary director." Clara stopped stirring her dessert. "Cornwall? That's That would be huge. It would. And it would also be a complete life change. It would mean moving away from Oxford, leaving Hearth, starting something completely new. Clara felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. 2 years ago, the prospect of such a change would have terrified her. Now, her first reaction was curiosity about the possibilities. "Tell me more about the project." Julian explained the details. It would be a luxury culinary resort that would celebrate both local Cornish ingredients and international culinary techniques. A place where people could come for immersive dining experiences. There would be cooking classes, dinners with guest chefs, workshops on local ingredients, and all would be set against the dramatic backdrop of the Cornish coast. "It's ambitious," Clara said when he finished. "And it would be a huge responsibility." It would be. But it would also be an opportunity to create something that doesn't exist anywhere else. And Clara? They specifically want us. As a team. They saw what we created with Hearth and want us to scale it into something bigger. Clara walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the familiar street where it all had begun. Oxford had truly become her home again. She had built a life here, put down roots, created a community. The thought of leaving it all was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. "What do you want to do?" she asked Julian. "I want to do what you want to do," he replied. "This decision affects you more than it affects me. It's your career, your reputation, your art." Clara turned to face him. "No, Julian. It's about our life together. Your ambitions are as important as mine." Julian approached her. "Then let me be honest. The opportunity excites me professionally. It would be the biggest project of my career, a chance to create something truly unique. But I only want to do this if you want to do it. If it's something that will make you grow and happy." Clara thought about the proposal, about what it would mean to leave Oxford again. But this time it would be different. She wouldn't be running from something, but running towards something. She wouldn't be alone, but with Julian. She wouldn't be leaving a failed life behind, but taking a successful one to the next level. "I have a question," she said finally. "Which? What would happen to Hearth? We could sell to someone who would maintain the vision and standards, or we could maintain a partial interest and bring in an executive chef to manage day-to-day. There are options." Clara nodded, already seeing possibilities. Hearth had established itself enough to continue without her daily presence, especially if she remained strategically involved. And Margaret? Margaret is 71 years old and in excellent health. Cornwall isn't that far away, 3 hours by train. And you know she'd love an excuse for regular visits to the seaside. Clara laughed, knowing Julian was right. Margaret had always loved Cornwall. "You're trying to convince me," she accused. "I am," Julian admitted, "because I can see in your eyes that you're already interested, and because I think it would be an amazing adventure." Clara returned to her dessert, but she was no longer truly focused on the recipe. Her mind was racing through possibilities, imagining what she could create in Cornwall, how she could expand her culinary vision on a larger scale. When do they need an answer? End of the month. If we say yes, we would begin planning immediately, with an opening scheduled for 18 months. Clara nodded. Enough time to make the transition responsibly, to ensure Hearth would continue to thrive, to plan carefully for the next chapter. "Julian," she said, turning to him with a smile he recognized, the smile that appeared when Clara had made an important decision. "Try? We're going to Cornwall." Julian pulled her into a kiss that tasted of future adventures and shared dreams. "Are you sure?" he asked when they broke apart. "I'm sure. 2 years ago I came back to Oxford because I needed a safe place to heal. But I don't need safety anymore, I need growth. And the best part of growing is doing it with yourself." That afternoon, they walked the streets of Oxford, visiting places that had become significant during Clara's journey home, and then to something new. The market where she had sold her first tartines, the cafe where Julian had championed her, the building where they had filmed with the Food Network. "No regrets?" Julian asked as they stopped in front of the space that would be Hearth for a few more months. "No regrets," Clara confirmed. "Oxford gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it. But now it's time to take everything I've learned here and create something new." They stopped in front of Margaret's house to share the news. As Julian had predicted, Margaret was excited about the prospect. "Cornwall!" she exclaimed. "What a wonderful adventure. And what an incredible opportunity for you both. Aren't you sad that we're moving again? Clara asked. Margaret shook her head firmly. Honey, I'd be sad if you didn't go. You're young, talented, ambitious. You should be building big dreams, not settling for small comforts. That night, Clara and Julian sat in the garden of their cottage, planning their future under a star-filled sky. It had been exactly 2 years since Clara had returned to Oxford, frightened and uncertain. Now she was about to embark on her next adventure, confident and excited. What do you think we'll find in Cornwall? Clara asked. I don't know, Julian answered honestly. But I know we'll find out together. Clara smiled, feeling a deep peace about the decision they had made. She had learned that home wasn't about staying in the same place forever, but about carrying love and authenticity wherever she went. She was ready to create a new chapter, to build even bigger dreams, to continue growing alongside the person who loved her not despite her ambitions, but because of them. The future stretched out before them, full of limitless possibilities. Clara Evans had finally learned not only how to return home but how to take home with her wherever she went. And this discovery had transformed everything.